Well, good morning to everybody. My name is Dr. George Sparks, and this is Biblical Archaeology from the Ground Down, sponsored by Bible Interact. I have a really good topic for us today on this podcast. It's called Giants in the Land. So you probably already got a good idea about what I'm going to talk about, and you're thinking about David and Goliath. But guess what? Well, you're right. You will be correct. I am going to talk about David and Goliath in a way, but hopefully not just as you're thinking. Now, we actually have to go back a little bit before the time of David and Goliath, which would be about 1000 BC, to get an idea about where the Philistines actually came from and how they ended up where they were to be in conflict with the Israelites. So we see at the end of the 13th century BCE, or the 19th dynasty of Egypt, and also into the 12th century, and that would be the 20th dynasty of Egypt. But the Philistines left the Aegean and they arrived on the shores of the Levant or the coastal plains of Canaan. After the Philistines later were defeated by Ramses III, they settled along that coastal plain and established what we call 5 cities, or the Pentapolis of the Philistines. And we read about that in the Bible, the words like, or the names of the cities, Ashdod, Ashkelon, Gaza, Gath, and Ekron. As the populations of the Philistines grew, they actually needed more and more land to cultivate their crops and actually feed their cattle. And what they did is they had to move away from the coastland. Well, they're occupying the coastland, but they're moving away into the central hill country of Canaan, where we have the lush fields, where they can harvest and plant their crops a little bit more easily. All right, so they're in the foothills, and this is what we call this territory between the coastal plain and the hills, the mountains where the Israelites established themselves. This central location is called the Shephelah. Some say Shephelah or Shephelah. But understand why the Philistines are encroaching upon the Shephelah. There's another indigenous population at this time also growing, once again, up in the mountains, and this would be the expansion of the population of the Israelites. And because of this is why we have the confrontations between the Israelites and those what we think of the decadent Philistines that were the Israelites' adversaries or nemesis. So one of the locations of a major battle that we read about and where the Philistines and the Israelites fought was in the valley of Elah in the Shephelah. And the Philistines were coming up against the army of King Saul. Of course, you already know the end of the story. So this actually proposes a challenge to me to make it interesting and at the same time intriguing. So when we think about how the Philistines are barbaric and uneducated, however, archaeology says quite the difference. That at the same time the Philistines were controlling the lowland, they were also very decisive in controlling some of the major technologies of that time. Well, even the scriptural narrative states that there were no blacksmiths found in all of Israel. And they actually had to go to the Philistines to get their farm equipment sharpened because the Philistines were concerned that the Israelites might make weapons if they had blacksmiths. So the Philistines had this technology also of iron. And even in excavations, they have found in situ of the place of the origin, of iron weapons. So they did have iron as a technology, which would sway the pendulum of the military advantage and power, would definitely be tilting towards the Philistines at this time, and the Israelites were actually the underdogs. Now, it was actually a Greek custom at this time from the Aegean. So it's brought into the indigenous populations of the land of Canaan, this tradition of if there were two opposing forces, that they would, if they came together and fought, this would cause a heavy toll, and battles are pretty expensive. So instead of having the two armies clash, in the Greek tradition, they would choose a champion, and depending on which champion won, this would be decisive on who would actually win the battle between or gain the victories between the armies. And this is what we also see in the epic event of Goliath and David. So on the day that David is to meet the challenger Goliath, the narrative describes the Greek fashion of warfare. Goliath, he has a helmet. He also has a coat of mail. That means the armor, the defensive in front of him to guard the center part of his body. And also he has shin guards and a shield. And he has a servant to carry his spear. But we also are told among the Israelites that there are no swords to be found except in the hands of two people. That means in the entire army of the Israelites, two swords. They have to, number one, go to the Philistines to have their farm equipment sharpened. And the two swords are in the hands of the king, King Saul, and his son, Jonathan. Now, that's pretty decisive. So King Saul offers his coat of mail, his suit of armor, to David. But David is just a boy, and Saul is a full-grown man. And in the Bible, we read that Saul is actually tall, heads and shoulders above the rest. So, of course, his armor doesn't fit, and there is no second choice because they have no blacksmiths in Israel to make swords or even defensive armor or shields. And David can't say, well, really, Saul, I take a medium, not a large. So that's not going to happen. Now, for the locations of David and Goliath, we know that David is from Bethlehem, and it's just a small hamlet, small village. And he is opposed. Now, commentaries do differ on this individual's actual size. He's probably tall, just like an NBA basketball star. But Goliath is a Philistine from the city of Gath. Okay, and this will come up again, the word Gath. I'm going to read from 1 Samuel 13 to verse 19. And it says this: Now no blacksmiths could be found in all the land of Israel, because the Philistines said, otherwise the Hebrews will make swords and spears. So all Israel went down to the Philistines to sharpen their plowshares and their axes. And they were charged 2/3 of a shekel. Some translations actually call it tin. It's actually a small weight. So it came about on the day of the battle that neither sword nor spear was found in any of the hands of the army of the Philistines, but only King Saul and his son Jonathan had a sword. And he explains why David is throwing rocks. So David makes an interesting statement to Saul. He says, let no one lose heart on the account of the Philistines. Your servant will fight him. And Saul replies, he says, you're not able to fight Goliath, the Philistine, because number one, he's just a boy. And number two, he's been a warrior since his youth. Now, this is an important statement. David said to Saul, your servant has been keeping his father's sheep. He's a sheep herder. He's a shepherd. But when a lion and a bear came and carried off the sheep from the flock, I went after it and struck it down, probably with a stone, a sling and a stone. And he rescued the sheep from the mouth of the lion and the bear. And when they turned on me, I seized it by its hair and struck it and killed it. In other words, he's very accurate at using the sling and throwing the stone. Now imagine if they're out, the young boys are out among the flock and they don't have video games. And what are they going to do? Well, number one, they practice with their slings. Your servant has killed both lion and bear, and this uncircumcised Philistine will be like one of them. So King Saul dressed David in his tunic and put his coat of armor on him, and also the bronze helmet. and he fastened the sword on the side of his tunic. So he has the king's sword. That means there's probably one more sword, either Jonathan's or Saul's, because they only had two swords. Maybe that's just a statement being made, but if we take it literal, David stated, I cannot go like this because I have not used these devices before, and it doesn't fit. So what Saul did, or what David did, is he took it off. Let's start over again. So David stated, I cannot go out with this because I am not used to these items, and it doesn't even fit. So he put it aside because remember, Saul was a full-grown man, and these are not fitting David. So as you know, David met Goliath in the field, the valley of Elah, in the Shephelah, and he struck him down with a sling and a stone. And that's what he was used to using. And with Goliath the giant now dead, the Philistines retreated. So you know the end of the story with David and Goliath, that David was a victor. But there's something interesting that's also recorded in the scriptures, in the scriptural narrative, if you will, that there were other very decisive battles to be won. And in these battles, there were also giants. It says they were the sons of the giant, maybe a Goliath, or the brother of a Goliath, or the brother of another giant within the family of those that came from the city of Gath. But David already had placed the idea in the people's head that to obtain the land that's in the Shephelah that the Philistines are trying to take over, he's already established that we can have a victory. So this thought in their head that the Philistines are undefeatable. They got iron, they got technology, and look at their size. But David proved that they could be defeated. So in the mind of other soldiers and the army, they also started to defeat the giants. That said, there's a statement that also reads that some actually had 6 fingers and 6 toes. Maybe this whole thing about being tall, they're trying to say by 6 fingers and 6 toes, maybe in an ancient way, that there's some kind of genetic deformity about them. According to 2 Samuel 21, from verse 15 to 22, one of the Philistines from Gath was named Rapha. Rapha from Gath had 4 sons born to him, but they all fell to David and also the servants of David. Being the servants of David is probably those that were serving with him in the military, fighting with the Israelites. Now, you're probably thinking, David and his men killed a number of the Philistine giants. Actually, the text has something more to tell us. It's more to tell us than just that they defeated giants. Number one, that David just did not go out and meet Goliath, but he also made a statement to Saul, did he not? That he practiced. He said, number one, I was challenged by a bear and I was challenged by a lion. He already knew in his head that he could defeat them. Why not Goliath? So I think sometimes we think that we have to have this sudden faith, a miracle of faith. But when we read about this great event of David and Goliath, it sounds like in David's life, he slowly had developed the skills that he's going to need to face the giant. We too in our lives need to develop skills. So when we come across the giants in our valley, the giants that set up in our Shephelah, that we're able to defeat them. So this statement that David makes to Saul, he says, took a lot of practice, did it? Him in the field, David in the field. But he is convinced that he could face that giant with what he knew, the sling and the stone, not with the spear, not with the shield, not with all of Saul's armor. Second, with this skill, he was able to overcome the impossible odds. The impossible odds, not just between him and Goliath, but the impossible odds between getting rid of the Philistines from that land, the land that the Israelites desperately needed. In defeating the Philistine Goliath, he also had made a statement and you could say, an advancement for his people to move forward, to take the land that they desperately needed. Third, that this mental and physical obstacle was the challenge. And it was overcome by others once they saw what David had achieved and how he excelled. And when he excelled, it taught others also to excel. Now, you might say, George, this was 3,000 years ago. What does this have to do with us today? Well, in a way, you got a point there, but not much. Now, this might be a little bit before your time, and it's before my time too, but it's a part of our history, and it's definitely not 3,000 years ago. Back in 1952, there was an impossible challenge, a physical challenge. It was to break the impossible 4-minute mile, to be able to run a mile in less than 60 seconds a lap. That's just it. It's just crazy. Can it be done? However, during the Olympics Games in 1952, Robert Banner ran the mile in slightly under 4 minutes. You know what his time was? 3 minutes and 59 seconds. By 1 second, he set a world record and broke the idea that that was impossible. And guess what happened? How long do you think that record lasts? The impossible record of 3 minutes and 59 seconds only lasted 6 months. And somebody else stepped forward and ran the mile in a faster time in just 6 months. Met the challenge and broke the record. Now let's go back to David and Goliath. To me, whether these verses are literal or traditional doesn't really matter, because we all have giants in our land that need to be defeated. And remembering David, that he practiced and he practiced and he practiced, and he became quite good at throwing just a rock, of all things, a rock that he found in a river. And he would use this to kill a bear and a lion, and then to defeat the Philistine. And he was prepared for that challenge, to defeat the giant in the land. And we have giants in the areas of our lives, whether it be physical, mental, emotional, but we could persevere, not just by ourselves, by also the assistance of others that have met these challenges and overcome, so that we can acquire our land that somebody is trying to take in our Shephelah. We can overtake and prove that we can take the land in the Shephelah and meet those impossible obstacles and make it achievable. Maybe some of you are thinking, well, how can it be that David and Goliath could only be anything but literal? How can it just be a myth? Well, I'm not trying to make it a myth. I'm not trying to make it just a form of tradition. I mean, after all these years, I thought it was literal too. It could be literal. Why? Why not? Well, back in 1993, I actually met this professor, Dr. Abraham Baran. In 1993, he took his team up to Tel Dan. It's a site in northern Israel, and it's a very wonderful site. And during the excavation, one of his crew, one of his team, found a stela. A stela is a stone with carving on it. And when translated, it said Beit David. And the word Beit, Beth, means house. So the house of David, or we could say the dynasty of David. And it dates to around the 9th century BCE. So think about it. If there was a dynasty of David, then there must have been a King David. And I would say almost 99%, 9 of all scholars agree with it. We know that there's a David. Well, on December 13th, 2014, not 3,000 years ago, 2014, there was a Tel site called Tel El Safi in central Israel, close to the valley of Elah, if you will. Traditionally, in the biblical word, it is Gath. So they were excavating biblical Gath, and it's called Tel El Safi, S-A-F-I. And they found a small broken shard, pottery shard, and it was excavated in situ. So in other words, they have a record of its origin. Not only that, but there was writing on it. And when translated, what do you think was on that broken potsherd, but a name. And the name was Goliath. Now it dates to the 8th century BCE. So we can't say that this was the Goliath that David fought. So what this tells us, not that this was the Goliath that David fought, the name Goliath was used among the Philistine cultures. And it's also accurately chronicled in the biblical narrative. So let's go over this. In 1993, Abraham Baran uncovered the Tel Dan stone, which mentions Beit David, the house of David. And then in 2014, they found a ostracon, a piece of pottery with writing on it that mentions the name Goliath. I told you to remember the name Gath because it's Goliath of Gath. And it's at biblical Gath where they found that potsherd that said Goliath. Ain't that cool? Now you think I'm done. Well, I'm not done yet. Because where Goliath was from, Gath actually means a press. Well, what do you mean by a press? Well, an olive press. So what do you think they found in the excavation at ancient Gath, at ancient Tel El Safi, if you will? They found the remains of oil presses. Some scholars believe that the Philistines were making more oil, producing more olive oil in the land of Israel than it might even produce to this day. So we got the Tel Dan stone, we have the name of Goliath, and the place where he was from, Gath, meaning press, and we actually found, or they found in the excavation, olive presses. Well, knowing this, I hope you enjoyed our podcast today. I know that I did. So in this presentation, remember to like and also subscribe. Let's start over again. So let's sum this up. When I read about the epic event of David and Goliath, it's not just about David fighting a giant. It's overcoming impossible odds. Those that are encroaching upon the land. You could say encroaching upon our physical health, our mental health, our emotional well-being. And we want to take that back. All right. And we can do this with the help of others that have also achieved this and move forward. And secondly, now I'm not going to take away some of the literal meaning in the scriptures, not at all. And that's why I mentioned the archaeology, because we found the Tel Dan stone, the Goliath inscription, and they're actually at ancient Gath, meaning press, and they found olive presses. Well, I'm finished. Thank you for your time. My name is Dr. George Sparks. It's been a great presentation, I'll say. And also, don't forget to like and subscribe. You have a great day. Thank you.